Good morning, everybody. What an exciting morning already. I am honored to have this conversation with Marc Ganzi. You cannot talk about cities of tomorrow without talking about him and his work. As you know, Marc, Tomorrow.City is all about leading U.S. cities into a modern and prosperous future. And this topic is sovereign AI infrastructure. And we know that AI infrastructure is essential to global competitiveness and to making sure our national security is in place. And you've spent decades at the center of digital infrastructure. Now, give us a little bit about the early days of wireless to where we are now. Take us back a little bit.
Well, I think if you trace the roots of wireless, you got to go back all the way to the 60s and 70s when the US government and state agencies introduced 220 megahertz push-to-talk radios. Like, that was really the start of public safety. That was the start of communications. And really, those networks were intended, when the FCC put that spectrum out, was really for emergencies and early day first responders. Fast forward to the early 1990s, go back to 1994 and the advent of the digital PCS frequencies, the 800 megahertz spectrum that was the original cellular A and B band networks. And wireless networks have evolved, and they've evolved to a place where really coverage is ubiquitous and it's everywhere. And that transition sort of happened from the mid-1990s to the early 2000s when we began to introduce really what was UMTS and mobile data to devices. And that promulgated, into, the late sort of 2008 to 2013 with 4G, and then 2013 onwards where we've been building 5G networks. And I think, as we think about what the future looks like, and if you sort of track, the advent of wireless communications, the advent of the internet, and now with the promulgation of cloud and applications, it all sort of eventually ends up, believe it or not, 83% of data traffic ends up on a wireless device. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about what the future of what cities look like, the promise of IoT networks really hasn't been fully realized. We've been talking about IoT for like 15 years. And so we started building the first IoT network. I remember, I'm really gonna take you back in time, but Ricochet Networks, which was backed by Paul Allen in Seattle in 2008, we built that pilot network for them. And that was really the first IoT network that was a wireless data-only network that was built for everything from security cameras to traffic lights to public safety. And we've come a long way. And really now with the advent of AI, we can actually begin to fulfill the promise of true smart cities and thinking about applications that go machine to machine. There's about 37 billion wireless devices on the planet today, which is pretty staggering. We're going in 2031, we're gonna be at over 59 billion wireless devices. So think about that for a second. We're gonna introduce over 22 billion wireless devices in literally the next 5 years. And most of those will be machine-to-machine connections, which is pretty exciting. And as we think about those applications, a lot of those applications will be industrial applications. So now we can kind of go backwards, right? If we know what's happening in 2031, we got to say, okay, how do we get from here to there? What's going to happen in the next 6 years that gives us confidence that the industrialization of AI is really going to happen? And so how do you make that happen? Well, it's really simple. We got to build a lot of infrastructure. We have to build a serious amount of compute. We have to build a serious amount of connectivity. And then the real long pole in the tent is whether this country can fix its problems with the grid, and if we can build enough power to enable the compute to happen. So I just gave you a lot to start the conversation, but that's really, if we want to get into the meat of what's really happening, and the challenge with our customers is they think about how to monetize AI, and most importantly, we move from consumer AI to industrial AI. That's really kind of what's around the corner, and those are the things that we're working on today at DigitalBridge, is we're trying to enable that compute. We're trying to build that power adjacent to data centers. We're trying to solve connectivity issues. We're trying to solve zoning issues. We're trying to positively change the narrative at the state level that data centers are bad. They're not bad. That's a narrative that's been created. And there hasn't been any conclusive evidence that AI data centers have increased the cost of power. There's other things that are happening that is contributing to the cost of rising power costs and other fuel costs in this country, which we can stay out of the political arena in my conversation. We'll leave that to folks in the Trump administration. But I think there's a lot happening, and there's a lot of change happening. There's a lot of transformation happening. But to enable cities to go forward and to really have the applications that happen that are going to really change quality of life, quality of security, quality of traffic flow, quality of trash removal. These are mundane tasks. But if you look around the corner and you think about robotics and where AI is going, a lot of that is going to be somewhat, well, not somewhat, a lot of it will be handled by AI. And it'll be handled by AI agents, agentic agents, and it'll be handled by, most importantly, devices that are being driven by AI and robots. I know that sounds a little futuristic.
No. I mean, listen, we believe tomorrow is here already, right? And so I feel like what's been important for us is really educating everyone, moving past the headlines and really into what you're saying. Your partnership with SoftBank, obviously they're making a bet. They understand the investment in infrastructure for an AI economy. And I would love for you to share a little bit about that partnership and how it's helped you to scale. And then I'd also like to just have you pull the thread a little bit about, really understanding why this infrastructure is so important. When you were saying like data centers aren't bad, like how do we help educate our communities around this?
Yeah, well, a two-pronged question. Maybe I'm going to take the hard one second, which is communities. Because I've been building infrastructure since 1994, and I personally have gone to zoning hearings and have explained to people why cell towers don't cause cancer, and have had to put reports in front of zoning boards showing electromagnetic emission studies. The reality is the data center industry is behind. It's not an organized industry. One of the best lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. is CTIA, which really covers the communications trade industry. And it's incredibly well funded by AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile. And so they've always known how to pitch the benefit of wireless, FirstNet being a great example of that, and other applications. And so once you sort of diffuse and debug this notion that technology is not bad, it's always easy if you're a city council member to vilify technology. It's the easiest place to go. It's not a red issue, it's not a blue issue, it's a purple issue. Blame technology, very easy. Always easy in a zoning board meeting to say no than to say yes. And so that's what we fought a lot when we were building first generation wireless networks. 97, 98, 99 were the toughest years to build cell towers. NIMBYism was at a massive groundswell. When the internet came and we were building a ton of fiber from 99 to 2004, we owned a fiber optic business in 1997. We got enormous resistance in communities in digging trenches to build fiber. Why? Because people thought that coaxial cable leaked radiation. Okay, not true, but again, it was easy to sensationalize. So today, people think that data centers cause water pollution. Again, the data centers we build are all using systems that recirculate water. And so the data centers that we're building today are really based on a cooling system that is completely liquid cooling the servers. So what you can do is you can take the water and you can push that water through a closed circuit. So you're not expelling water out of the data center. And that is next generation thinking. Our company, Switch, out of Las Vegas, has a patent called EVO, which is first of all, the best cooling system in the world. The NVIDIA Blackwell chip doesn't melt when you use EVO. And so we've come up with solutions to keep the water inside the data center. In Santa Clara, we built the first data center where we use the ambient air outside to cool the servers for Microsoft. So again, we're not using forced liquid cooling. We're using the air that's in the San Francisco Bay. We bring the air in, we purify it, we push it into the data hall, then we expel it. Now, there's certain parts of the year where the temperatures in San Francisco exceed the data hall temperature, and so you equalize with forced air cooling. But there are solutions to navigating around all of this. And One of the great things also that we've done is we've gotten 88% of our global compute is now with green energy. So we've been the leader in green energy. Switch is 100% renewable power. DataBank is about 75% renewable. Vantage is now 100% renewable. And so we've been a pioneer in trying to figure out how to bring renewable power to data centers, not because it's politically chic, because it's the right thing to do. And so I think this narrative around CO2 emissions, wasting water, the cost of power, all these things are boogeymen that the data center industry needs to get real. They need to get together, and they need to do candidly, what the telecommunications industry has done. And the hyperscalers really haven't done a good job evangelizing their story as much as the communications companies have.
I know
so that's the hard question. Now
I
we
know
go to the
that
easier
Jorge
one.
is going to take us off stage in a second, but wait, Jorge, I have one more question before we end this.
The SoftBank question.
Well, no, so yes, SoftBank, but also it's related to this conversations about sovereign AI infrastructure and the importance of global competitiveness and national security and all of those things. And I really want people to understand that the rest of the world is moving so fast. And I want them to understand that as a CEO of DigitalBridge, what does it mean to have sovereign AI infrastructure and this whole...
It's national security one, right. Totally critical. The Swiss government has had their own sovereign cloud for a decade, right. Just to give you a sense of how the Swiss think about it. The EU is moving very fast to adopt that. We actually, at two of our data centers in the UK, we operate almost 80% of the UK's sovereign cloud. It's Switch. We own and operate a lot of the compute for the government, and I can't talk about it. See, I even get nervous. But the reality is the US is a laggard in data sovereignty. Being able to, what data sovereignty really is any piece of data that's created in the country and any piece of data that comes into the country is that sovereign nation's data. And so a lot of really smart countries are building their own large language models. China doesn't have 6 LLMs. Right. China literally has one large language model, which is owned by the Republic of China. We're currently having 6 companies go out and build LLM, and our government is running off of those LLMs very selectively. I'm a big proponent of the US government having its own LLM. I believe that we should have our own data sovereignty. I think that should be, of course, in a repository that's incredibly safe in a Tier 5 data center, which we and Equinix are the only 2 Tier 5 operators in the world. And this is really table stakes for the US. And so I don't want to have people leave the conference saying, we're not focused on that as a country. We are. This administration is very focused on it. I can tell you they're spending time and capital thinking about how to protect not just the US's data, but also each of the agencies. DOE's focused on it, DOD's focused on it, and all the other agencies that are related to that. So there is an interagency conversation that has to happen. And then obviously, where do you put that data? Who builds that LLM? Do you outsource it to Amazon? Do you outsource it to Microsoft? I'm pretty sure they're not going to outsource it to Anthropic. Very sure about that. But a lot of those conversations are happening, and I'm not terribly scared by that, because as we think about the 6 LLMs that we are building and operating in the US, we're actually ahead of China. And we're ahead of the rest of the world in private large language model architecture. So we need an hour to talk about this.
I know, and I just want everyone to know that AI infrastructure is essential to moving cities into the future, and we're really grateful for all the work that you're doing at DigitalBridge. So thank you, Marc.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody.